Biden administration's promise that the U.S. would accept 100,000 Ukrainian refugees certainly has not become a reality, with the latest data showing that just 12 Ukrainians were accepted through the United States official refugee program. Now, the White House is putting the blame on the U.S. legal system, as the Department of Homeland Security reveals that nearly 3,000 Ukrainians crossed over into the United States through the U.S.-Mexico border. So the question then becomes, is the Biden administration planning anything to maybe get it a little bit closer to the goal that it set for itself? Well, reports are saying that they are looking at some sort of a parole program where refugees would be able to come into the country as long as they have sponsors here in the U.S. And already advocates for refugees are raising concerns about that kind of a program, noting that it would keep refugees from getting access to certain benefits and protections.
They're inventing this new approach through parole, which provides no security, no safety net, and so that's worrying and leaves the applicant at the mercy of the backlog and broken asylum system if they want to stay here permanently.
Meanwhile, thousands of refugees who are not Ukrainian are raising their frustrations and concerns as they are trying to gain access to the U.S. and they're fleeing violence from their home countries in Latin America. And this all comes as the U.S. Border Patrol has already predicted that there would be a record-breaking surge of migrants looking to cross over the U.S.-Mexico border this spring.
I think we also deserve the opportunity to cross the border. They should let us in because we're also fleeing. It's different what we're running from, but it's still a war against gangs.
Given that Ukrainian refugees aren't the ones benefiting from U.S. involvement in their country, the question then becomes, well, who is? And in order to find that answer, we just have to look over to the Pentagon, where reportedly they are hosting the leaders from the top 8 U.S. weapons manufacturers on Wednesday for a meeting where the main subject is making sure that Ukraine is supplied with weapons and ready for war for years and years to come. So it appears as though once again those who aim to benefit off of this conflict are the ones who the U.S. government is listening to.
The people who have the most interest in influencing the direction of the coverage are weapons makers. They have the most direct financial stake in the way we cover issues of war and peace. Unfortunately, they are interested in more war and less peace.
When it comes to the mainstream media, their coverage here is not much different. For example, if we look at former CIA director turned defense secretary Leon Panetta, he used one of his many recent appearances on CNN to talk about how the U.S. just is not sending Ukraine enough weapons. And at no point was it mentioned that Panetta also reportedly has ties to Raytheon, which is one of the largest defense contractors here in the U.S. And yet with all of this talk about the need for the U.S. to send more weapons to Ukraine, it never is mentioned that this trend of supplying weapons to a country only leads to instability and chaos, which then creates more refugees.
This is U.S. policy always, to make great promises and come through on nothing when it comes to the people themselves. So with millions of refugees, once again, U.S. policy is to give assistance to almost none of them and to instead impose on the surrounding countries an enormous dislocation. At this point, the Biden administration has managed to process in March 12 Ukrainians who had refugee status. And by the way, this happens all the time. Look at the hundreds of thousands who were promised refugee from Afghanistan, not much different in Iraq, in Syria, in Libya, or all of the countries where the U.S. has instigated wars, kept them running for years, and created an enormous dislocation of peoples who really are forced to leave their own country and then live a very dislocated life and at enormous expense in the surrounding countries.